Now, here I'm going to be using a student shot. So this is a student from Animation Mentor who animated this shot. It's an awesome shot, beautiful work. So here we have this character talking to a frog. It's just awesome, beautiful work. I love this shot. So in this shot, the character is holding a frog, and the way the constraint is set up is that this hand right here is leading the action. You can see it's moving the frog, it's moving the other hand, and everything just follows that. Great, perfect. That's a totally valid way of animating this, especially if we want to keep that arm kind of in line with the body. Sometimes that can make it a lot easier to do, especially if we leave an FK or we use the space attribute in there. But at this point, we're in the polish phase. So this shot right here now is getting ready for polish, and we want to make sure all our arcs are beautiful. Now, the problem with this here is as we're trying to polish this frog and all of its arcs, it can be kind of a pain. So you'll notice like right here, see how there's this kind of like weird wiggle in there in the hand? It's not much, but that can be a pain to clean up and animate. Now, is it impossible? No, not at all. The problem comes from the amount of work we need to do to polish this. So imagine I'm trying to just tweak the arc of the crown right up here. As I rotate this, you'll notice that it can be very painful to get that rotation just where I want it to be, because the rotation of the hand doesn't match the angle of the frog exactly. So let me go through here. So the angle of the frog here isn't quite perfectly in line with the hand. It's pretty close, which makes it a lot easier. So that's actually a very nice, the way they set up their shot here. They paid attention to that, and it makes the whole thing a lot easier. But it's not going to be perfect. Not only that, but we're trying to kind of clean up the arc of the frog itself, and we're pivoting it from this point in front of the frog. Again, it just adds an extra layer of complexity. It can make things a little bit of a pain to try and work with. Not only that, but we might also start getting into gimbal lock. So for example, if I rotate this forward, let's see which angle here is going to show. Okay. So if I just start rotating this a little bit right here, which angle is it? Okay, here. So you can see as I'm rotating in Y, let's turn on just our rotations here and rotate this in Y. Look at all three axes in the graph editor. See how they all change slightly? This can be kind of a pain to work with when you're having to try and clean up axes across three things and you're getting that slight gimbal lock. Kind of a pain. Now this shot is very well structured. We're not getting much gimbal lock at all in here. I've seen shots where you try to move one rotation here and all three curves are just breaking and it's a nightmare. It's just a pain. So not only are you trying to clean up that frog, but the hand is doing this the whole time, and you're essentially having to animate on ones to avoid the shot just breaking. That is not fun. So how can we make this a little bit easier on ourselves? Well, there's a few different things we can do. One, we could just brute force it and just go, okay, cool. Yeah, no problem. Just animate it the way it is. Yeah, good. But again, we might run into some issues. And one of the other problems that I kind of forgot to mention is in this shot, everything is constrained directly. So if I try to move this hand, for example, it'll just snap back. So I can't have the character holding the frog and kind of doing a little pet of the frog. I couldn't have the character like readjust their hands under the frog. They are glued in place. So I need a way of maybe having that be a possibility as well. Now, if you imagine doing that, so I move this hand here, which will move that hand. I then have to counter animate this one, counter animate the frog so it stays straight, just to kind of get this wrapping motion in there. That's going to be a nightmare. So again, I could brute force this, or I could reverse the constraint. Now, reversing the constraint sounds like a pain. Essentially, when you think about it, it means deleting the constraint we currently have, which is the frog to the hand, and then remaking a new constraint where the hand is constrained to the frog, and we animate the frog instead. Because then we have full control over the frog, we can get those perfect arcs on the frog, and then the hands, we can do whatever we want with that. It could be a nightmare. I don't want to lose all this animation. Like I said earlier, this shot is in the polish phase. All we need to do is the last little details. I don't want to have to reanimate the whole thing just to make it a little easier to animate the arc of a crown or add a little tiny wiggle to a hand. That's gonna suck. Okay, how do we do that? How can I get more detail in here without having to redo everything? Well, when it comes to this, the biggest thing that's going to help us is baking in animation. So baking in animation is essentially taking something that is moving through constraints or non-keyed information. Essentially something that is being moved, but there's no specific keys on it. It's just something else is moving it. It's taking that and turning it into keyframed animation. So since this frog is constrained to the hand, what I can do is select the frog right here. You'll notice that right now the blend parent, this is the constraint, is turned on. If I turn this off right there, and let's actually delete the keys here so it just stays off, you'll notice that the frog just kind of does this weirdness in here because it does have actual keys. So it's just animated doing its own thing right now. Well, we don't want that. We want to have it follow what it used to do. So I'm going to turn the constraint back on. Now it's following perfectly. So with this, I'm going to select the root control here. That's the control that's moving the frog right now. Select whatever is moving the object you want. Go to Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation. So I'm going to bake this, and we've got a few different options. We've got Sample By, and then Smart Bake. So Sample By means that it's going to go through your entire shot and set a key every one frame in this case. If I set this to 2, it'll go through and turn that constraint into keyframe animation and put a key every 2 frames. Or I could turn on Smart Bake, which Maya will then go through the shot and just put keys where it thinks is needed. So for me personally, I usually try to do Smart Bake first, just to see if I can get something a little cleaner. But a lot of times when I'm in this polish phase, I really don't want Maya to miss a key and have something messed up. I want this to be as exact as possible. So I'm going to just sample by 1. So I'm going to have a key every single frame for this frog. I'm going to select that, make sure my sample by is set to 1, and I'm going to hit bake. Now it's going to go through here, and it's going to take a while. It's going through the whole shot. And what it's doing is essentially setting a key everywhere, and then we're going to be able to just get rid of the constraint. So right there, you can see there's a key on every single frame, but the constraint is still here. This is because we already had keys on this previously. And right now the constraint is still on. Well, let's turn the constraint off, see what we get now. So turn that off, and you'll notice the frog stays exactly the way it was. It's not doing any of that weird animation anymore. We have literally taken that constraint and turned it into keyframe animation. Now what that means is I can actually go into my outliner here, select my frog, and just delete that constraint right there. So now if I select this, there's no more constraint. It is just pure keyframe animation, no constraints whatsoever on this frog. It follows along perfectly. Great. So before we do anything else, let's finish reversing that constraint, and then we can go into the polish of the animation. So at this point, I need to reconnect these hands to the frog. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to frame 1, the very beginning here. I'm going to set a key, and I'm going to delete the constraint on this hand, because I don't want that hand to be constrained to whatever it's constrained to. I want to make a new constraint system here. So I'm going to go to the outliner and then just find that constraint right there. So right here. Take that, delete. And now that hand is free. And if I was to play through it, you'll notice, ooh, it's messed up. So I'm just going to keep this on frame 1 here and remake the constraint here while they're still in the correct position. So to do this, I could just do a quick reverse constraint. So I select the frog, then the IK wrist, constraint, done. That's all I really need. At that point, it's pretty much exactly what I had before. I can't animate the hands, but I'll still be able to polish the frog. Very quick and easy. Nice. But I want to make this a little bit more complicated. I shouldn't say complicated, a little bit more refined, where I have control on how to actually animate that hand. So for example, as the character is holding the frog, maybe I have him like rub the frog or like just do this kind of motion. Or maybe he just takes one hand and I can just rotate it up a little bit. Hello, Hassan, how's it going? So I want to be able to have that extra little bit of control here. So how can I do that? Well, first, let's just kind of look at it globally. Oh, Ramadan, there we go. So let's take a look at how we would set this up. Why does SmartBake leaves weird place keyframes between keys? It shouldn't put keyframes between keys. If you're getting that, it might be that you already have keys on your object beforehand. So I would maybe delete the keys that you have beforehand and then bake it. Also make sure that it's set to bake every single frame and not on like 0.1 or point something frames. So like for example here, if I go through here, everything is on a whole frame. There's no partial frames through there. There's just a lot of keys, which we will fix in just a bit. So don't be scared of this horror that is a key on every single frame. But we want to get the constraint working first before we start adjusting any animation. So let's kind of go over the constraint setup we're going to try to do here. So we've got the hands and the frog. Apologies for the rough drawings here. I did this like 5 minutes before the stream. So the frog the eyes, I just had to call it. So we've got the hands and the frog here. How are we going to connect these? Well, first we have the controls. We've got the root control for the frog. That's the thing that's moving the frog. And we've got the eye key controls for the hands. We want to connect those to the frog. The way I would do this is I would use a locator setup. So I would create a bunch of locators here and use these as a way of attaching the hands to the frog. I'm going to have locators on each side of the frog. This is going to be the pivot point where the hands are going to be able to rotate around the frog. I'm going to have locators that are going to be within the IK hands themselves. These are going to allow me to adjust the pivot points. I kept them on the outside here just so we have clarity. And then I'm going to have another locator either underneath or on top of the frog that'll allow me to connect this whole constraint system to the frog itself. So essentially, we're going to have our follow locator. That's down here. This is going to make it so that the hands follow the frog. We're going to have our pivot locators on each side. This is going to be the pivot point for the hands. And then we're going to have our offset locators in the wrists right here. And the way I'm going to set this up is I'm going to have each IK control constrained to a locator. Those locators parented to the pivot control parented to the follow locator, and then the follow locator constrained to the root of the character. So what that means is that as I move the root of the character, everything moves with it. And because this locator here is parented and so is this, we can still animate those and move them around. So as I animate my shot, I'll be able to adjust the hands if I need to. So this is going to be the setup that we're trying to aim for here. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit looking at it here. Hopefully it'll make more sense as we're actually setting it up. So let's actually take this and create that exact same setup that we had here. So I'm going to create a locator right here. Scale it up. And one thing I like to do is if the locator is way down there and I want to bring it up here, just hold down the V key. This will turn on point snapping. You can see it up here in the top of the window there. And then just middle mouse click on any vertex where you want it to go. So right there, that snapped it right to the crown, and then I can put it into position here. So let's call this our follow locator. So this is going to be the locator that's set underneath the frog. Now, the frog ideally should be zeroed out and not have any extra rotations on it. If it does, that's not a huge issue. What I can do is take my locator. I'm selecting the locator here. Then I'm selecting the frog. I'm going to go to Modify, Match Transformations. And I'm going to go to Match All Transformations, but I'm going to open up the options and turn off Scale. Because I don't want to reset the scale on my locator. I just want to realign it in the translations and rotations. So if I do this, boink, that locator is now perfectly aligned with the frog. And in this case, I'm actually going to put it above the frog here, just because it's going to be a little easier to see. So right there. That's our follow locator. Perfect. So with this, let's just duplicate that. I hit Control D to duplicate. And now let's add our pivot locators. So this is going to be pivot locator right. So this is going to be for his right hand here, the red one. And I'm essentially just going to take this and ideally place it, let's make it a little bit bigger, right on the surface of the frog here. Now, I don't have to be absolutely perfect, but the closer I can be, the better. Okay. If I'm having issues, like the hand's in the way right here, I can just take that hand right there. I'm going to go to frame 2. Move this out of the way. Since there was no keys on that frame, move that out of the way. I can then take this, place it right where I want that hand to pivot from, on the surface of the frog right there. Maybe a little bit more towards the center. Right there. And then just take that hand and delete the key. And that'll bring it right back into place there. Okay. So that locator is pretty much where I need it to be. Let's duplicate that. It's going to be my left hand. Once again, just place this where the pivot point of that frog should be, or where the hand should pivot from. So that's going to be probably under the frog a little bit more this way. So somewhere around there. Yeah, that's pretty good. So we'll call it there for now. I'm not going to be too picky about it. Now, one thing here is you'll notice that, man, those locators are hard to see. They are a pain to look at. You have to just find the right angle to be able to see them there. So changing the background color can sometimes help make it a little brighter. So that you can do that by hitting Alt-B on your keyboard. Or selecting your locators, going into the Attribute Editor, under Object Display, turn on the Drawing Overrides right here, and then change the color right there. I can just change this, let's go pink right there. Much easier to see right through. So I can just pick any color I want from here, or you can change the color to RGB and actually just use the color wheel right there. So let's actually, I'm just gonna go white, like so. Now I can do the same thing on the other one. So enable overrides, and then just turn that to white. There we go. So with that, we need 2 more, and that's for the wrists. So I'm going to duplicate this one right here. This is going to be our offset locator. Like so. And I'm just going to place this one right in the wrist. So I'm going to select the locator, then the wrist control right here. Modify, match transformations. Just match that. There we go. That locator right in the wrist, right through there. Do the same thing with the other side. And I'll explain everything right afterwards, like what each one is doing here. So offset, locator, right there. Match that transformation. So modify, match transforms. Like so. Okay, so we've got our setup in place. All the locators are in place. Great. But nothing's happening right now. So we need to set this up and actually constrain things. So let's start with this one. This is our follow locator. Essentially, this is the locator that's going to cause everything to move along with. Now, what I would do here is I'm going to take this locator and I'm going to constrain it to the root of the character right there. I'll select the root control, then the locator, go to my animation menu set here. Don't open MG Picker. Animation, there we go. Constrain, parent, and I want to make sure maintain offset is turned on. Okay, so now that means that as I move the frog, that locator moves with it. Perfect. That's what I want. Now, from there, I want my pivot locators to follow this control. So I'm going to select my pivot locator here, select the follow locator. So now I'm doing a parent. So when parenting, you select the child first, then the parent. A good parent always puts their child first. That's a good way of remembering it. So select the child, then the parent, hit P on the keyboard. Then we'll do the same thing with the other one. It's child, then parent, hit P. Now if I move this, those move along with that locator there. And if I move the frog, everything moves together. Great. Perfect. Now I need these locators, the offsets, to follow the pivots on each side. So the locator on the right side is going to follow the locator on the right side. So offset to pivot, hit P to parent them together. Do the same thing on the other side here. So you'll notice that we're starting to get our hierarchy right there. So we've got the follow locator, our pivots, and then our offsets. So at this point, everything should be following along, like so. Now we just need to constrain the wrist. So once again, let's constrain those wrists to the offset locators now. So with a constraint, we select it in the opposite direction. So it's the object that leads first, then the object that follows. So I'm going to select the locator first, then the IK hand, constrain parent, and add that in there, right through there. Do the same on the other side. Locator, IK wrist, constrain. So now, if I move that frog, everything moves with. Done. Yay. Okay. So why this long, complex constraint setup? Why did we go through all of this hierarchy right here just to get this straight constraint? Well, essentially, by doing this, we now have full control on those hands. So for example, let's say I want this hand to rotate around the frog. Well, I can just take this locator right here, rotate that, and move that around the frog as I go, and just animate it from this point right here, like so. There we go. Nice. But maybe I feel like, you know, that pivot point, it's not in the right spot. So I've got this right here, and I feel like it needs to be, especially if I'm rotating it up here, it's not rotating from the right spot. It needs to rotate from the inside of the hand over here. So that point, not in the middle index finger area. That feels a little weird. Well, that's where the offset comes in. I can take this offset control here, this locator, and I can just move this around wherever I need it to be. And I reposition that hand there. And then I can take my pivot point, and now it's pivoting from that point instead. So not only am I able to still animate this hand while it's on the frog, I can change the pivot point at any time in order to have the hand pivot from a totally different location. So for example, I'm going to go extreme here. Let's say I put the hand over here. So now he's just holding the frog with his fingertip. Now I can do this. So now he's pivoting his hand from that fingertip and balancing the frog on his finger right there. So I have full control over this and can very easily animate extra motion on those hands however I need in any case. Or even if I just need to readjust the wrist so it's not quite so broken at one point, I can just kind of do that and help straighten that out a little bit. So that's what all these locators are there to do. It gives you that full control. Do we need it? Not necessarily. We don't have to use them, but it's there just in case. If we're going to redo this constraint setup, for me personally, I'd rather have a constraint setup that allows me to do more if I need it. Okay, so that's pretty much the constraints. At this point, if we play through our shot, essentially we got exactly where we started. So we did all of this work and we are pretty much in exactly the same spot that we were before, except now we have a ton more keys. Ugh. Why did we do all of this? Well, the big reason is now if I'm cleaning this up, I can rotate the frog instead. And you can see how this gives me a little bit more control over polishing exactly what I need. Instead of rotating the frog from the wrist, I'm just doing these small adjustments here. And you'll notice that the graph editor, aside from the keys being horribly messy, is actually pretty clear what's happening. So the curves make sense. They're not doing some crazy random motion. So it'll be much easier to clean with this. But before we do that, we kind of have to get rid of all these extra keys because, oh boy, this is going to be a nightmare to work with. So before I do anything, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all my curves here, then go to curves. Oops, what did I just hit here? My tablet messed up there. Okay, cool. So select all of that. Don't let your tablet mess up on you there. Go to curves, and I'm going to do a Euler filter. E-U-L-E-R. That's spelled Euler, pronounced Euler. And I'm just going to do that. And you'll notice that one of the curves here, this one, the rotate Y. Let's actually just look at our rotate Y. Right now, it's kind of got this big jump right here. That's because it's got a Euler flip. Essentially, the rotations are flipping all the way around and just spinning around. We don't see it here, but if I was to extend this, you're going to see that frog just spin fully right there. So what an Euler filter does is it just takes all of your curves and removes any 360-degree flips. So I'm just going to go through here, do that, and now that rotate Y makes a little bit more sense right through there. Now, from there, we need to clean up all of these keys. I do not want to do this manually. I've done that before. That is not fun. Having to go through and just delete all of the extra keys you don't need when you bake things out on once. Ugh, takes forever, especially on a 176 frame shot. This is going to be tedious. So instead, we can select our curves and go to curves, simplify curve right here. And essentially, this is a tool that'll allow you to set exactly what kind of tolerance you want, both in time and value. So time is the actual time, value is the distance. And from here, I'll just use the default settings. Just leave it at that. Hit apply. Look at that. Way better. A lot less keys. Now, something I always like to do before I do that is take my curves, and I'm actually going to buffer the curves. So I'm going to click this button here, buffer curve. I'm also going to make sure to go to view, make sure that buffer curves is turned on right here, show buffer curves. That way when I simplify this, let's make our graph editor a little bit bigger. I can see if there's any variations here. So for example, right down here, you'll notice that it actually did simplify this quite a bit. So you can see where the previous curve used to be. So I can actually just take this now and adjust my tangents to match my previous curve if I wanted to. I don't have to. But it kind of gives you an idea of anywhere that might have tweaked or changed. So with that, we've got this nice curve here. And overall, if we actually look at the animation through here, it looks pretty much the same. We don't have that many differences in there. But at this point, I can go through my graph editor and start cleaning it up, and it should be nice and quick and easy to get all of these rotations, especially if I'm tracking the crown right here. So for example, let's find a spot right here. Right here, there's a little bit of a wiggle right there. So I can just go into my translations, make sure that the translation has this nice smooth ease to a stop. So translate X side to side. Right now there's kind of this little wiggle right here. It goes sideways right here. Maybe I'll just get rid of that. Just clean that out. There doesn't really need to be a sideways motion right there. So now we get that nice smooth motion right through here. Let's look at our translate Y. That looks pretty darn good. Overall, I might just push my spacing and the curve right there. And then the translate Z, there's this kind of little bump right here. So I'm just going to smooth that out. Right in there. Same thing here. A little bit of a bump. So just smooth that out a little bit. I could get rid of that key. Don't really need it. Okay. So we've got that nice smooth stop right here. But you'll notice that the rotation, there's this big rotation happening right through here. Well, I can just go through, let's grab our rotations. This is going to be rotate Z mostly. And you can see it happening right here where it stops and then it just twist, 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 twist. Well, I could just have it come through as it's dropping here. Let's actually just have it come to a stop right there. So now it comes down, we get the twist here, and then it just holds right there. So is this something that you couldn't do before with the other constraint setup? Oh no, you could definitely do this exact kind of thing before. The big difference now is that we're rotating from the frog. So it gives us more control to make sure that the frog, which is the character with the eyeballs that we're going to be looking at, is more specifically held in place, and that the hand supports that versus the hand essentially being the driving force and we're having to fight it to get the frog to do what we want. So same thing here. I want that frog to hold a little bit more by the time it gets to this point. So I'm just going to clear out some keys, move this down, and have that transition happen in that motion right through there. So with that, it kind of comes in here. Now if I look at that rotate Y, it's hitting that pose a little bit harder right there, but we still have that nice moving hold right through. We're also getting a little bit of rotate X. You can see it in there where the crown kind of tilts back forward here. So right there, we can see that. Maybe I want this just to show some weight in the frog. I don't know why I said, well, it is the squirrel rig that's been turned into a frog, which is really cool. I'm actually just going to take this, delete some keys, and just have a little bit of an ease in right here. So now we just get that nice stop right in there. Maybe that's a little too sharp. So let's actually push that a little bit more. So we get a little bit more of a weight shift in there. So right through there, we've now polished that motion nice, quick, and easy. And we're making sure that the frog, squirrel rig, the frog character is now the thing that is being the focus here. Now from there, on top of that, we can then add some extra motion on the hand. So if I wanted to, I could have some keys on the hand here where as he comes down, I'm going to do this super roughly. So as he comes down here, we can just rotate that hand down slightly, like so. So you feel that little drag in there, and then it settles back in right here. That's a little too late. So let's just do that over time. So something like that, maybe settle in a little sooner. So you get that little bit of a lead and follow on that hand. And we can just start refining and polishing that hand so it's not just perfectly locked on right there. Maybe add a little bit of a twist right there. Now, I'm going overboard with this. It would be very slight. This is more just so we can see it and feel it. So now you can get that in there. That would be horrible. Don't do it this way. But we have that control. If I don't want anything, I can just leave it as is. Done. So that's pretty much the reversal. It's one of those things where it can be extremely helpful, especially if you're running into some gimbal lock or if you are having a nightmare situation of trying to polish an arc. Now, in this situation, we don't have too much of a problem because the hand here isn't too far from the point of the crown. So the point of the crown is like up here, palm is there. It's not a huge difference. This would be extremely painful if you were animating someone with a sword, where the point of the sword is like way out here and you're animating the hand, because any little twist in that wrist is going to cause that sword to swing around and you're going to have this horrible nightmare situation. And if you even have the tiniest little gimbal lock in the wrist, which maybe not even noticeable on the hand itself, you're going to see it at the tip there and it's going to be just shaking and wiggling like crazy. So being able to reverse that constraint and then just get the exact rotation you want on the sword and the hand just follows can make a shot go from a nightmare to polish to essentially just taking a few minutes to polish. And I say minutes, like 15, 30 minutes, maybe an hour, something like that, compared to animating on every single frame trying to keep it in place, which can be a nightmare. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, I will say in this case, would you have to do it in this shot here? Honestly, no. Because in this shot, like I was showing earlier, your rotations are in good shape. You're not getting any gimbal lock. It's going to maybe be a little tricky to clean up certain areas, but it's not going to be that bad. Honestly, it's going to just take a few minutes. The area that's going to be a nightmare is if you want to add a little bit, I'm getting hiccups, a little bit of hand animation. Because of your current setup and the one hand leading, anytime you want to add even just the tiniest hint of a hand nudge to make it a little bit more dynamic, you would potentially have to do a whole bunch of counter animation. Now, on this rig, you do have another option, which would be to select your IK control and turn on the gimbal control right here, which gives you another hand control right in there. And with this, you could actually move this around and animate the hand with the IK still in place. So in your shot, without having to reverse the constraint, you could do that in this shot specifically. But the problem with that is that your pivot point is still in the wrist. So just kind of trying to get a little bit of a tilt like this is going to be much trickier to do. Whereas in this situation, again, if I want to rotate that just from those fingers right here, I can just do this, and now I can just adjust my pivot point right there. Now I can rotate that hand nice and easy right around the squirrel there without having to translate and rotate and whatnot. Or if I feel like, oh, that wrist is really breaking here, I can just kind of pivot it from here. Let's adjust that pivot point just a little bit. Right there. And now the wrist isn't broken. So I can just do this. So as he's holding that frog, and I need to have that a little further forward so his fingers don't cut through the frog. So I can just do this now very quickly and easily, so I can get micro adjustments in the wrist to avoid them breaking. So that's where this would come in very nice and handy. If you don't have plans of doing that, for this shot specifically, you don't necessarily need to do a whole reversal. So just some notes